Brian Briscoe is co-founder of the real estate investment firm Four Oaks Capital LLC, which currently holds nearly $8 million in assets under management. He is the host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast, which brings together experienced and aspiring investors in its weekly Ask the Expert episodes. He is also a lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps, stationed at the Pentagon until he retires in 2021. Join us as he shares why active duty service people should have a transition plan and how skills learned from serving in the military has helped him in his real estate investing business. We have Brian Briscoe joining us from our country's capital, Washington, D.C. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate having me on. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So, I'm just glad that we're finally able to catch up here. I know we rescheduled a couple of times, but this is exciting. We had a nice conversation before we got started. So let's tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got started in real estate.
So I'm active duty military. I've been active duty for 19 years now. And I was a reservist going through college when the World Trade Center went down, and I looked at the writing on the wall and I'm like, you know what, my reserve unit's going to get called up, because, President Bush gets on the TV and says, hey, reserve units, the reserve unit called out and said, hey, everybody get ready. So I decided just to take things in my own hand instead of waiting for a potential deployment where I'd get, maybe 30 or 60 days notice. I just decided to go active duty, take the ball into my hands and be able to schedule my life around it. And that was almost 19 years ago, and here I am, still active duty. I'm in the Marine Corps right now working at the Pentagon. But I early on in my military career, I picked up the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, like a lot of people do. I mean, it's almost cliche now how much you hear it. And I started trying to buy a house at every duty station. I move every 2 to 3 years. And everywhere I moved, I'd look at housing prices versus rents. And if they were favorable, we'd buy a house. So after, 10, 15 years, we had a handful of single family homes that, were not really producing a whole lot of income. I mean, we were breaking even on some, we were making a couple $100 a month on others. But it wasn't quite the real estate dream that I had thought it would be, several years back. And couple this with, we were talking earlier in the show, and I'll bring this up. I had a really good boss. I was, the executive officer, which is like a deputy director of a battalion. And, the Marine Corps requires the commanding officer, who's, the head honcho, to do exit interviews with everybody getting out of the Marine Corps. And, we had a door between our offices, and we kept the door open 90% of the time. And I would listen to him on every one of these exit interviews say, just talk to Marines about their plans and how important it was to plan to get out. And he wanted them prepared coming in. So he would prep their leadership and say, hey, before they come see me, you need to talk to them about their plan. You need to make sure they have a solid transition plan getting out. Anyway, after 6 or 8 months of hearing him talk about this, I realized I'm at my 17-year mark. I don't have a plan myself, so that's really what got things into high gear. As I started thinking, I need to plan for this transition. At the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to get out when I was at the 20-year mark or the 22-year mark or the 30-year mark, but I realized that I needed to at least start having a plan. And that's, I've always enjoyed real estate. It's always been a passion of mine. I've always been reading about it in my spare time. And I had a small portfolio, so I started thinking, okay, how can I make this real estate thing work for me? Read a couple books on multifamily, and it just made sense. You can scale a lot quicker. It's roughly the same process as buying a single family home, but it's buy one, get 50, or buy one, get 150, or buy one, get 24, depending on what your apartment size is. And then I really got excited about the idea of syndications, started listening to Michael Blanc and Rod Cleef and Joe Fairless, and then later on, Adam Adams and Whitney Sewell, and, really love the syndication model. So, sold my single family portfolio, put all my eggs in that basket. And, that's really what got me started was, just, listening to a really good leader and a really great person, make sure Marines had transition plans. And that got me to start thinking about my own transition plan. And, here I am, a couple of years later, we have a company, Four Oaks Capital. I got three great partners, and, four apartment complexes with a total of 186 units right now.
So what was that transition like going into multifamily? So what was your first deal like?
The first deal was a $4 million property in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It was a long time coming. It was, probably, a year to 18 months worth of study, because it's a different, single family. You buy a house, you put somebody in it, and it's really that simple. I mean, there's a little more thought to that, to be honest with you, but multifamily is a different scale, so I wanted to make sure I was doing it right. So I did a lot of education. I paid into some courses, where I did a lot of coursework, started learning a lot, started participating in forums and meetups. And then I bought into, the Michael Blanc coaching program, which I think accelerated a lot of things. Along the way, picked up some partners, and don't want to make this sound like it was rainbows and unicorns the whole way, because it wasn't. But yeah, there was a lot of hard work in it. This is like over the course of 18 months, between when I committed to doing multifamily as my my transition plan, to when we had the first thing under contract and purchased. So it was just every day waking up and saying, what are the next couple of things I can do to push my my business forward, to push my transition forward. So the first deal, like I said, $4 million property in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It's upstate South Carolina, which is one of the fastest growing areas in the nation, especially along the East Coast. And it's a value add play, one that we found from a broker who, was one of the very few brokers who would give me the time of day, to be honest with you. And we ended up raising, quite a bit of money to make that work. I think we raised, 1.95, so just shy of $2 million for that deal. And that was a combination of me and my three partners. And like I said, just a lot of hard work, a lot of waking up every morning and saying, what's the next thing I need to do? And a lot of talking with the partners and planning and figuring out how to get that deal across the finish line.
I think one thing that you brought up that kind of just rung a bell with me was when you said, what's the next thing that I should do? How did you go about identifying that? Because I think that a lot of people are probably, they probably still have that same idea going through their mind and asking themselves that question. I know I've found myself many times asking myself that question. So how did you identify that?
Well, the whole thing, I mean, the whole process can seem overwhelming, especially for somebody who's brand new. And that's just how I chose to do it, So, like I said, I bought into some education programs, and the one that I bought in was Michael Blanc. I know there's many good ones out there. He does have a very good program, and part of his program is he lays everything out step by step. And there's things that you need to be doing simultaneously. Like you're always looking for people with money. You're always looking for deals, and so I do a weekly planning where I kind of list out, okay, here are the things I need to do this week to push push my business forward. And then on a daily basis, instead of looking at the big picture and getting overwhelmed, because quite frankly, I'm the type of person where if I have a Herculean task in front of me, sometimes I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's just way too much. I'm just not going to do anything. Sometimes I get paralyzed just by the enormity of a task. And I found that for me, it's just, what's the next thing I can do? What are the next two things I can do? What are the next three things I can do? And, break it down into bite-sized pieces to be able to get there. But as far as the blueprint, I use the Michael Blanc blueprint, which, like I said, his course breaks things down from beginning to end, first things first, second things second, and then go from there.
What do you think is it? I mean, this is going to sound very general. What do you think is the most important thing that you've done that has really driven your success?
I would say coaching was probably the most, the one pivotal thing was coaching. And it didn't, it cost a lot of money. But it was, I think the money that I put forward actually committed me, you can put $100 or $500 into a product or something like that. And, if I lost $300 or $500, okay, that's a couple days worth of work, or that's, you know, maybe I'll stop drinking energy drinks for a month, and that's about it. But, it was a $25,000 investment. And number one, that was kind of, in my mind, an absolute, this is what I'm doing. There's no going back. So that really helped. And then just having the mentor with me, he wasn't there 24/7, obviously, but every time I had questions, I had a designated person who was very experienced in the business. He has, I think, a portfolio of 1,500 doors, between multifamily and retail. But he was able to guide me through the process. I would say just that decision, number one, solidified my commitment, put me on the right course, and accelerated my growth, because, just having that mentor there kind of got rid of a lot of the fear, so when I was doing my next couple of things, he was also there to guide me as well. And he very much helped focus my efforts. Prior to that mentorship, I mean, even with the program, I was still kind of all over the map. But he gave me focus and also accountability, because I knew that every 2 weeks I'd be on the phone with him and he'd be asking me, hey, so how have you been doing on X, Y, and Z? So I'd say the coaching was probably the key thing for me.
And another thought that came to mind too was with regards to when you mentioned your team. So the team that you ultimately put together and you did your first deal with, how did you go about identifying these people?
Just participating in forums. I mean, I know you've got a really good Facebook forum that you have going on, a group of people that are very active. Once again, I have a hard time coming on podcasts without sounding like I'm pitching Michael Blanc programs, but it was a Michael Blanc forum where I found my partners, and I think I put all my eggs in the Michael Blanc basket right there. So I would, it was just a basic forum where people ask questions and you post answers and you interact. I first met my partner, Eric Shirley, almost 2 years ago. And at first it wasn't, hey, let's start a company. At first it was, we realized that we were in the same area. When I say same area, we're investing in the same area. So my wife's from Columbia, South Carolina. We decided that the Carolinas is the market we wanted to invest in. And, he lives in Wilmington, North Carolina, and he was born and raised in Columbia as well. So he was also looking into Carolina. So at first it was just comparing notes, just kind of like talking about cities in general and very general things. And then one day, as we were comparing notes, I realized that we were chasing the exact same deal, talking with the same brokerage and literally underwriting the same deal. So I mentioned it to him and he said, well, let's just try to partner on this deal. At the time, I was comfortable enough with him to say, yes, I'll partner on one deal. And he brought to the table, his business partner, Brian Mallon, who I've since gotten to know. And, he's also an amazing person and very talented. So at first it was the three of us and we were putting out offers here and there. And when we started getting into the higher numbers, with a $4 million deal, we're generally raising 1/3 to about a third to a half of the purchase price in capital. We realized that's probably where we needed the most help. And, Eric brought on Todd Butler, who is also a Michael Blanc coaching student, to help us raise capital. So we all came together for one deal. And after working through that deal and talking to each other twice a week, we decided that, we wanted to make that a permanent thing. And that's when we formed Four Oaks Capital.
Now, the relationship dynamic that you said there are 3 or 4 partners.
There's 4 of us.
4. Okay. Yeah. So the relationship dynamic that the 4 of you guys have, like, how do you guys manage that?
We give each other lanes. It's like swim lanes in a pool. You stay in your swim lane, and we talk a lot, so at first, and we have changed the structure. We changed our responsibilities many times since we started. When we first started, we would talk to our mentors about roles and responsibilities quite frequently. And we came up with, here's what you're doing, here's what I'm doing. And that was all well and good. We got our first property under contract, and you all stayed in our lanes, and then we closed on that property, and you kept on pushing forward. And second property came along, and we realized that, okay, now we have an imbalance in how things are done. So when we realized that there was an imbalance, and at this point, I was the asset manager, and I work at the Pentagon, which is not conducive to asset managing. We pivoted, and we came back to the table, and we said, hey, this is maybe not the most efficient way to do things. Let's change things around. So we talk a lot about what we're doing. We talk a lot about everything, basically. So and when we realize that somebody may be overwhelmed with work, and 3 of the 4 of us have a day job. Todd quit his day job to work on this full time. And I think I don't know if I mentioned on the podcast, I told you earlier that I'm retiring in about a year. So I'll be working full time in the business soon as well. We're all eventually going to be working full time in the business, but it's just a matter of looking at who has time, who has the capability, and making sure that all the bases are covered.
As an active duty serviceman, I mean, I'm sure that the military has instilled a lot of, beliefs and, different mindset, on you guys. Where do you find that, and maybe we may or may not be able to kind of like overgeneralize. I don't want to sound like I'm overgeneralizing it, but where do you find that people that are either active duty or retired military, where do you see that their skills are best utilized in a syndication?
There's a wide variety of people that are active duty, and I think active duty population is, for the most part, it's a subset of the U.S. population. I think the only difference is we're, in general, younger than the average American and healthier than the average American, just because of the screening process getting in. There's a lot of things that we learn in the military that translate directly. Project management is one thing. So I think you have a lot of guys that are just really good at project management, and just the general mission accomplishment type thing, because that's something that's stressed. The 2 fundamental things in military leadership are, number 1, mission accomplishment, and number 2, troop welfare. So depending on what service and different philosophies, in the Marine Corps, they make it very, very clear that accomplishing the mission is your number 1 goal. If troop welfare were your number 1 goal, you'd never go to war. You'd never start shooting at people because they'll shoot back. So, we have this idea that the most important thing, no matter what, is accomplishing the mission. And I think that mindset transitions very well to multifamily, because, the military members are very, very much looking at a mission, and they treat it like a mission. They treat their job like a mission. And it's just like, okay, we are going to go purchase a 120 unit apartment complex, and it's succeed at all costs, sometimes. So, not at all costs, but you know what I mean.
So personally, I guess, personally speaking, what do you think has been your biggest takeaway from the military that has really helped you excel in your business?
Yeah, I think the mission first attitude helps, but the second part of it is people. I think the Air Force mantra is, mission first, people always, which almost puts the 2 on the same level. But just realizing that it's a balance between, accomplishing the mission at all costs and keeping your people happy and having good relationships. I think early on, as a young officer, I placed way too much importance on mission accomplishment, and not realizing that you're not going to accomplish the mission if you're breaking the backs of the people who are going to, be the main workforce in accomplishing the mission. So, I realized with some really good leaders and lots of practice that there's two parts to it, where you can't really place one above the other. You always have to be looking at your troop welfare. You always have to be looking at relationships. If you have a good relationship with a subordinate, that's part of leadership right there. So yeah, I think just the servant leader mentality that the Marine Corps has really helped me. A lot of times, people will call me up and ask to call me for advice. I spent 30 minutes on the phone this morning with somebody who's starting his own podcast. We're launching our podcast. By the time this airs, the podcast will have been launched. But I've gone through a lot of effort in the last couple of months getting that podcast off the ground. And I just spent 30 minutes on the phone with a complete stranger, telling him, hey, this is what I did to get my podcast started. So I think the relationship part, the servant leader aspect has really helped out because, out of these 30-minute phone calls, and I probably do them too much just because of, time, but occasionally something good happens out of that. Like, 30-minute phone call with Eric Shirley the first time, my first business partner. I didn't know that would lead to a business partnership later. So really, I think that's probably been one of the keys because every once in a while, one of those 30-minute phone calls turns into somebody who wants to invest with us. Sometimes it's somebody who can help add value to us. You just never know at the time, who's who.
On the subject or the topic of managing the relationships and like finding the balance between, like you said, the accomplishing the mission and then managing the welfare of your people, I mean, my question and my thought is, so how do you find that balance? Because when I think about myself in the past, I was all about the mission and I really didn't care much about the relationships. Was my approach when I first started my business like 11 years ago in Beijing. But I found there were so many problems with that. So how do you find that balance? And then at the same time, you don't cross that line with the relationship and you're basically, it's too close to where you start letting things slide.
That's the subject of many books and many, professional, we call it PME, professional military education, many seminars they put us through is where to find the balance. And it's hard. I've had some people that I know, some subordinate leaders that I think are too close to their subordinates. And in the military, we have a very rigid structure, a rigid hierarchy. And there are certain rules on, fraternization rules on, who can be friends with others, So basically the rule is, we're not supposed to have overly familiar relationships with, people of different ranks, because at some point, I'm a Marine, and if I have to look at somebody and say, go attack that machine gun nest, or, now as a lieutenant colonel, it's going to be, I have two subordinate, companies who have to go into a battle, I can't play favorites, and I think they have the rigid hierarchy there so we don't play favorites, but, it is a balancing act because you need to be able to listen and you need to be able to trust up and down the chain of command. I don't know if I found the perfect balance. I think I found a working balance where I think I know it's working when a subordinate can come to me and ask questions or ask for advice. And that's kind of one of the things that I've noticed. If people who are working for me are coming to me and asking questions, then I think I'm in the range of good. If I'm not getting any feedback at all, if my subordinates are just saying, yes, sir, I'll do it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm too far on one side. So anyway, that's my take on it. I don't know where that perfect balance is. Jocko Willink has a great book, he talks about the dichotomy of leadership where, exactly that. Every aspect of leadership, there is a dichotomy. There is you go too far to one side and things are going to work. Things are not going to work for one reason, but if you turn around and go too far to the other end of the spectrum, things are not going to work for an entirely different reason. So, you need to be close, but not too close. You need to be approachable, but not too approachable. You need to be strict, but not too strict, but it's one of those, there's a dichotomy with it. And I think somewhere in the middle is the answer.
How do you, I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this question without it sounding kind of off, but I know in the military, my understanding, like you just mentioned, you have that hierarchy, right? And then you issue an order to someone, they're just supposed to follow it without question. Now, when you look at like business settings, and then I think of people like Ray Dalio and Bridgewater Associates and his type of leadership and management style, he actually likes when people challenge him, even if they are subordinate. It doesn't matter where they are in the organization. What's your take on that?
I don't think the military is a ask without or follow thing. There are times where I would especially say like in the heat of battle or certain training events where you're imitating battle. There are times where it is ask, I give you an order, you do it now. But what you have to realize is in order for that to happen, there has to be trust and confidence in a leader. So if I come in and expect people to obey my orders without question from the very beginning, that'll only last for so long. With a new senior subordinate relationship. I think there has to be the question. I think there has to be the discussion with subordinates. And I think you have to be transparent enough that they know that you have their best interest in heart, that you're not going to assume needless risk, because going back to there's a machine gun nest over there and we got to take the machine gun out. People are probably going to die trying to take that machine gun out. So I think the subordinates have to know that you wouldn't ask them to take that machine gun out if it wasn't absolutely important to the greater cause, so, and they need to know that you're going to do everything you can to support them while they're doing that, so, whether that's making sure they have, helicopters on standby or artillery or other machine guns who are suppressing that machine gun, they need to trust you enough to be able to, go through with that order instantly and without question.
Mm. And basically, like that trust is kind of developed through a lot of communication with them. And I'm thinking, so even from like just little things that we can do to kind of like develop that trust. So you have like smaller, I guess, successes, if you will. And then they see that, this guy really does know what he's doing. And then when you have like this big kind of life or death type situation, they've developed enough trust with you to kind of just follow through with that.
And a lot of it's buy-in. I mean, a lot of it is I don't, when it comes time to issue the order, they've got buy-in in how we do it, so it's not like I'm directing every single way they move. We have this idea of centralized command, decentralized control in the Marine Corps. And once again, every service has a little different play on words. But the idea is, I'll give the mission and the intent. That machine gun nest has to go away because it's blocking X, Y, and Z. Give them the reason why they're doing it and what needs to be done, and then allowing them to figure out how. So they have a lot of buy-in in what's going on. They'll look at the resources they have available. They'll do the planning, and theoretically they'll come back and say, depending on timelines, hey, hey boss, I think we can do this. Here's our plan. It would really be great if we had some, overhead support. If we had some F-18s on station while we do this, that would be awesome. And then it'd be incumbent on me to make sure they have the support they need. So, definitely the buy-in is part of it. And throughout training and throughout the planning process, you get the trust in your subordinates, and your subordinates get to trust you, if everything's working correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you just said kind of just reminded me, it's like it works just both ways, you figure, because like you just said, you give them the reason why, and then you can leave it up to them. You're basically trusting them to help figure out how, to actually go about in doing that.
And the reason why is actually more important than the what, because, another thing they say is no plan survives first contact, so you may have the best plan, just like you imagine a football, you put X's and O's on a chart, and you say, on paper, every play is going to score a touchdown, and then you put 11 other players out there. It's the same in combat is, things happen. The enemy gets a vote. There's lots of other things that are happening out there where it's not going to go as planned. Nothing ever goes as planned. But, if you give them the why and they're trained properly, when things aren't going as planned, they can adjust, and really the most important thing is accomplishing the why and not necessarily the what. So, if the order is, hey, I need that machine gun nest taken out because of, and you give them the why, and if they run into a problem and they can't take out the machine gun nest, they can still accomplish the mission by accomplishing the why. If they occupy them and, whatever the why is, there's ways to do it without, potentially doing the what.
So what would be a key piece of advice you would have for listeners out there?
Wherever you are in your situation, I would say you need to have that why. One of my favorite books is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, whatever. Yeah. It's Stephen Covey's 7 Habits book, but he talks about this big burning why that you must have. And that there's a part where he's talking about, every time you say yes, you're saying no to a bunch of other things. I think the first thing you need is that big burning why. Have that end. Have the end state in mind. Before you start the process, and that way you can make your transition plan. All right, you have that end state in mind. You can build your plan to get there. Here are the intermediate steps to get me to my big burning why at the end. And that way, when you're doing your weekly planning or you're waking up every morning, you can say, okay, what are the next 2 or 3 things that I can do to get to where I need to go? But it all starts with, beginning with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm. And how can our listeners get in touch with you?
FourOaksCapital.com is our website. We also have the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast, which is available on all major platforms. So I say the easiest way is just go to our website, or listen to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast.
And that's going to be live, actually in a couple of days, right?
2 days from today, it goes live. So by the time this airs, it'll be live. And I think it's really unique. We're bringing an experienced investor and an aspiring investor on every episode. And we're allowing the two to interact. The first part is like any other podcast where we talk about the experienced investor's story and history. But towards the end, I bring on an aspiring investor on every episode, and there's literally a question and answer period where they're just like, hey, just like you asked me, what are the best thing? What's my advice to people who are starting? There's somebody who's starting and they're asking direct advice. So I think it's a little more. It's unique, and I think it's very real as far as the questions and answers that come out of it.
Yeah, that is pretty unique. I'm looking forward to it. First episode's airing on July 1st, right?
Yep, first 6 episodes.
First 6 episodes.
6 in. Yep. So nice. First 6 episodes on July 1st, and that's a fun one.
Okay, I'll be downloading, and I'll definitely give you a review and everything like that. So looking forward to it.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.